What's up guys? Got a really fun video today. I'm sitting down with my brother who actually owns some Airbnbs to talk to you all about the first Airbnb he ever built, some of the challenges and just difficulties that he went through in actually building the Airbnb, but then also the money that he's making from it and just his overall take on the market with all the tariffs and everything going on in the Airbnb world in general. It's a really fascinating interview and we're gonna dive into it right now. So with that being said, let me introduce you to my brother, Shay.
Hi guys, my name is Shay. I work in industrial real estate development. I'm 30 years old and I do Airbnbs on the side alongside some Airbnb marketing plays.
So thanks again for doing this. I think they're gonna find it really interesting. Before we dive into the numbers and tell them kind of how you did it, why don't we tell them where the property is, kind of just give an overview of the Airbnb itself. There's actually 2 buildings on site. It's a really cool layout that he designed from scratch. So if you wanna kind of give them a little backstory on where it is and how you put it all together.
Yeah, so the property is located in Landers, California, which is slightly north of the Yucca Valley Joshua Tree area. So we're a little ways removed from the park, but we still have a lot of the amenities that a renter would want to see when they go out to Joshua Tree. So that includes a beautiful scenic landscape in the background, a lot of Joshua trees on the property. The only thing that we're really missing out there, which is something that if you're interested in the Joshua Tree market, would be access to boulders. So a lot of geographical terrain, the smooth granite boulder look that people love on Instagram photos. That's about the only thing that we're really missing on the property, but everything else, including seclusion, great views, and a bunch of Joshua trees, it's all there.
But outside of all that, I mean, why did you pick Landers versus, Joshua Tree within city limits or kind of closer to the park entrance? Was it more of a pricing determination to do that? Or was it just an area that you thought had a lot of potential? I mean, what kind of drove you to do Landers?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it kind of goes down to process, right? So when you're looking at a property to acquire, you want to do a couple of checks while you're evaluating an opportunity. And first one is zoning. So you need to find something that enables your use. In this case, it was a vacation rental use. So there are certain zones where that's allowed, and there's certain zones where there's not. And there are also certain cities versus counties that will be more inclusive and allowing you to do certain uses that'll be more, and some might be more exclusive. So I'll give you an example. In San Bernardino County, which is where Landers is based, it's not a city, it's a county, municipality. That county is very favorable towards vacation rentals. They're less favorable in Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear, but they are more favorable out in the desert area like Yucca Valley area, Joshua Tree, Landers. And that means if we find a residential zone out there, it's a very high likelihood that you're gonna be able to do a vacation rental. So we started there. Look for a residential use that allows for vacation rentals.
How do you even find the land to begin with? Because I've been to the property, it is out in the middle of nowhere. It's beautiful. I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you see it, but when you look at it on a map, and I'll pull up a static image here so you can see just where it is, it really does seem like it's out in the middle of nowhere. So how did you even find the land to begin with?
Yeah, so once you have your zoning areas, right, you look at a zoning map and you see which areas you're allowed to build your use. So now you say, okay, I've got a geographical target, and within this target, there are a bunch of properties. So the next thing you want to look at is how do I build what I want to build economically? And to do that, it requires utilities. So you can either drill a well or you can connect to municipal water. That's your way of getting water, right? And then your other option for power is you're gonna do a renewable energy source or you're gonna tie into the grid. And there's some drawbacks to doing renewable, which includes financing and getting better mortgage rates. So for us, we knew that we wanted to tap into the grid. So we had to get something that had power nearby, meaning adjacent to the lot or on the lot. And then for water, we wanted a municipal water supply because in the desert, you're going to drill a well, but there's no guarantee that you're gonna hit water. And the cost of drilling a well can be very expensive. So we don't want to roll the dice, drill a well, be out a couple $1,000s and have to keep on retrying that process on a piece of property that we already invested a lot of capital into. So for us, the risk wasn't worth the reward. So going back to how do you find the land, first you start with zoning, then you say, how am I going to build it economically? And then you start tapping into some things after that. And for us, that was, what does a renter want to see when they go to the property? And so we kind of drilled down to what is the experience that we're trying to deliver. And for us, it was seclusion. So a place where couples are going to go to and they're going to feel like they're secluded and away from everything else. So we wanted something a little bit removed. Next was Joshua trees. If you're in Joshua Tree, a renter is going to want to see Joshua trees. It just makes sense. So cater to that Martian environment, that experience that they want to take, Instagram photos of and then blast out to their social media following. So we basically put all those together And then I started creating a database of all these properties that fit that target, right?
So these weren't even on market properties. These were just properties that you thought would be a good fit. And then you started just trying to find the contact information, creating a database, and literally just cold calling each site.
So on market or off market, it didn't matter. And if it was on market, this is back in 2020. Yeah, 2020 and 2021. Yeah. So the market was insanely hot.
It was height of the pandemic.
It was. Low interest rates, all of this, right? So if a property was going on the market, it was going to be snatched up quick or it was going to be overbid. So what benefited you at that point was to go off market. And to do that, you have to database a lot of contacts and a lot of properties. So you find your target area, you find what you're looking to build economically, and you find areas that are, sexy or whatever you might want to call it for your property. And you just database all of the parcels in that area. You find the owners, and we can talk about that more in the process to do so. And once you have a database built of all your target properties and the owners and the contact information of those owners, you do what you're supposed to do, and that's to get on the phones or start sending emails or do whatever you have to do to reach these people and see if they're interested.
Probably in taking an offer. One response for every 100 calls you make or something.
Yeah. It took me around 2,000 calls to get a property that we liked, and it was worth it.
Well, and this is a really cool story too. So they find a property they like. How many acres total was it when you first?
20 acres.
Okay, so they buy a 20-acre property at first, and I don't know if you remember what you paid for it.
Yeah, so it was pretty funny. We called a bunch of different owners and we were entertaining different properties all at the same time. And we came out of escrow on a couple opportunities, just didn't go through with it, dropped out under due diligence. But on one of them, while we were under escrow, the owner told us that he actually had an adjacent parcel that he wanted to add into the transaction. We said, oh, well, that sounds interesting. And we looked at it and it had some seasonal wetlands on it. And that basically means that, if you're next to a wetland, there's stream setbacks. There are other things that you have to be aware of, especially in California, that make it hard to build on. And so we kind of, took that and offered a low ball value for that additional piece of land. And he accepted that. And so the total purchase price of two 10-acre parcels right next to each other, separated by a road, but 20 acres in total, was $65,000.
And if I remember correctly, there was a higher point that you guys really liked, and then there was kind of a lower point that you didn't really like or see much potential.
Exactly.
So you ended up selling off the bottom part, right?
Yeah, so we kept the parcel to the north that had better views. It had less less neighbors, really. There was nothing that was built north of it.
Perfect for an Airbnb.
Exactly. Yeah. It offered all the seclusion that we were looking for, all the amenities, everything that we thought was going to be perfect for this property. So we held on to that one. And what we did with the southern lot is we put it on the market and it sold for $60,000 about 2 months later.
So you got almost your entire initial investment back just by selling off the bottom portion. So you were only into it at that point for $5,000 plus some closing costs and due diligence, pretty much? Wow. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, that was a COVID deal. Those ones are, you get lucky.
So you've got the land tied up now. You were able to sell off the bottom portion and you control the part that you really want to develop and build upon. Obviously, with being near, a national monument, and Joshua trees, if you guys don't know, are, I believe, critically endangered and protected in the state of California. So it really impedes development out here. So obviously, permits take a little bit longer out there than in most cities in California. So talk to me, because I know that you guys were able to monetize the land while you were waiting for permits.
Yeah.
And then kind of walk me through, the architecture phase, actually getting the permits, and then, starting construction with not only all of those obstacles, but also the COVID pandemic going on and finding work and everything else that was going on at that time. It was quite the undertaking.
Yeah, so lots of things to unpack there. And we can start with, how did we monetize the land while we were going through the permitting and entitlement process? So we knew that there was going to be a long entitlement process, and that's just because, things were moving slow at this time period. And to get through the county approvals, we knew that there was going to be a bit of a delay. So we thought, okay, we're going to be sitting on this land. Sure, we got a lot of our money back, but how can we monetize it while we at least have it?
Right.
And what was big at that time, and probably still is, I'm just not too familiar with it these days, was Hip Camp. And Hip Camp was basically the camping alternative to Airbnb. So we listed our property, just raw land on HipCamp.
So no utilities, no
utilities.
It's literally just dirt. They
Just
rent
dirt.
from you and they pitch their own tents. Right?
Yes, exactly. And it actually made a couple $100 a month and during peak season.
What's kind of the nightly rate on that? Is that?
I think it was like $50 to $100 a night, and it depended too. Like in peak season out in Joshua Tree is typically in the spring. So the spring season, it would actually draw in like a couple thousand.
Wow.
And that was nice income to have while we were having some capital outflows to go through permitting and entitlements. So that was great. One lesson that we learned from that whole process is when we bought the land, we just went out there to celebrate, right? Like we celebrated this transaction, a great closing. And so we brought a generator, we had a speaker, and we took some photos of the whole experience that we had out there, just a little mini party. And we used those photos as our listing on HipCamp. And so, what we learned through that process is that you attract the guest that your photos show, right? So for us, we attracted a lot of party. And that obviously caused some complaints with our neighbors, even though our neighbors were, football fields away, right? So we quickly removed all photos of anything that was kind of party related on the HipCamp listing and just shifted it more to a relaxing, camping experience.
So while you're going through all the permits, how long did it take you basically from selling off the bottom portion, hiring an architect, which we'll talk about architecture in a moment.
Yeah.
But, going through all of those motions and actually submitting to the city your plans and going through the entitlements, how long did that all take, would you say, like from start to finish?
That's a great question. I think that we closed sometime in 2021. And I think we were able to get all of our plans approved, I want to say 12 to 16 months after that. Maybe a little shorter. Actually, I want to say around 12 months.
So called a year.
Yeah, called about a year.
And to your point, there's two peak seasons out there. It's really spring and fall because it's too cold in the winter, it's too hot in the summer. So you were generating revenue through HipCamp in the spring and the fall, which kind of got you through that year. But it was pretty arduous to get through all that. And then the architecture side, you had an idea of what you wanted these to look like.
Yeah.
But you hired an architect to kind of finalize everything and really put the pen to paper, right?
Right. And so this kind of goes back to, how can you get to what you want to build most economically and efficiently? And for us, we knew that we wanted to have a 2-home layout, right? And for us, there's 2 ways you can go about that. One is that you do 2 different homes on a parcel each. And in California, they have something called an ADU law, where it basically streamlines the approval process for building 2 identical homes on a lot. And so
if they're identical, square foot for square foot,
square footage can actually vary a little bit. Basically, the first home is your barometer, right? So if your first home is 1,000 square feet, that second home can be up to 100% of that first home size. It can also be a little bit smaller, but it can't be large.
Does that include outdoor improvements, or is it only enclosed?
For us, I think it's just the enclosed space, but I'm not an expert on that one.
Yeah. Just curious.
Yeah. So what we did is that we knew we wanted to have 2 homes on the property. It's just going to, be cheaper to build both at once, and also each would be able to cash flow. And we're building to couples, right? So you're kind of limited by how much square footage you actually need to build if it's just 2 people staying at the property. So for us, we knew 2 tiny homes is always the route to go.
Well, it's kind of brilliant too, because if you have 2 couples that want to travel together, if you have 2 families, if they're looking to kind of do a compound, they're close enough where you can rent out both and still feel like you're part of the same vacation.
Right.
But they're also distant enough where you can have 2 separate groups staying there without feeling like they're on top of one another.
Exactly. And another benefit too is that it is in an isolated and remote area. And so when you drive out there, especially at nighttime, it can be a little eerie getting to this property in the middle of nowhere where there's no street lighting, you're on dirt roads, you're completely out and off the grid. And then when you arrive on the property and you see that there's another home identical to the one that you're staying in, but removed.
Adds a little bit of security.
Yeah, you feel good about that.
Yeah.
So that was an unintended benefit that we kind of realized through the process.
So we're going to cover numbers in a second. You're going to hear all about SHEA'S, as far as his cash flow, what he invested, and basically his overall return so far. It's been a great project for him. But before we dive into that real quick, I know he also runs a company called SHEA'S, which is a super cool Airbnb service. I'll cover that on another video. It's going to be too much to go into on this one. But because you operate that, you see a lot into the world of Airbnb. So where do you see the market going right now, especially with all these cities enacting these laws, even in places like Joshua Tree, which is super remote? Do you think there's still a lot of upside for people in Airbnb, or do you think that hotels are finally starting to catch up and it's a model that needs to be updated?
Oh, good questions. I mean, I'm super bullish on the travel industry overall. I think we're still riding a lot of tailwinds post-COVID of people wanting to travel more and experience life. And I think that how vacation rentals are going to continue to evolve is that there's going to be stricter and stricter regulations put into place, especially in markets that are undersupplied by residential housing. So for every unit of housing that goes to a vacation rental, you're losing a unit of housing for someone to live in long term.
Well, that's why I like Palm Springs, for example, all of their neighborhoods, they have many neighborhoods, no more than 20% of the housing stock can actually go towards Airbnb.
Exactly.
So you see a lot more cities, especially out here in California, kind of protecting the housing stock for the locals. I know it's like an issue in Hawaii, it's an issue on the East Coast. So, I mean, to that point, it is happening.
Yeah.
But it also creates some opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I don't know if this is still the case, but I do know that when I was looking at Laguna Beach, couldn't afford it, of course, but vacation rental entitlements run with the land. So if I bought a home that was a vacation rental, as long as it's a continuing use, meaning that that vacation rental is still being operated as a vacation rental when I buy it, then you can continue to run that property as a vacation rental. If I were to go to Laguna Beach and try to build a Airbnb or a short-term rental, it would not be allowed. You cannot do it. It is precluded in the zoning code. So that's kind of an example, right? Where if you got in early on having a vacation rental and then the zoning code changed, you're what's called grandfathered into that use, meaning that you're a continuing non-conforming use. You can continue operating as that use, but if you sell it, sometimes it removes it, or if you stop operating for a period of time, it could be a year or 2 years, then that use is then revoked. So there's a lot of people out there who kind of have this goldmine opportunity where they got in on vacation rentals early and they have a legal non-conforming use.
So, I mean, with that, obviously there's a lot of competition out there and there's new developments popping up all the time in the Airbnb space. Have you guys been pretty consistent with bookings since you opened it? Are there plans to add additional units on your land? I mean, are you pretty bullish still on that site, or are you looking at other markets?
Yeah, so I think what we're looking at for the future of our site there is we're going to do a lot split and then get a mortgage for each home individually to pull out capital. But we're only going to do that when rates drop. So right now it doesn't make any sense to refinance. So there's no point in us doing a lot split. But what you can do when you build an ADU in conjunction with your primary residence is that you can then do a lot split and then you have 2 single family homes and you get a mortgage individually on each of them. As long as your lender, the original lender who gave you that mortgage on the entire property to begin with, approves of that process.
Well, and to back up a little bit, so after you guys got the land and you got the permits and entitlements, you guys actually got a construction loan to build it.
Yes.
Correct, which at the time seemed like a high rate. I think you were at like 7% or around there, which now isn't that high anymore. But back then it was. So you used the construction loan to actually fund the construction. Once it was complete, then you got a traditional mortgage on it.
Exactly.
And pulled the rest of the cash out.
And we did an interest.
Paid off the construction loan.
Yeah. And one thing we did too is we did an IO, interest only mortgage on the property currently. And the benefit of that is that while we're not paying down the balance of the loan, it's that we can basically deduct everything that we put into our mortgage payments. It's an expense, right? You can deduct that against your earnings. So that's been beneficial for us. And then when rates drop, we'll plan on doing exactly what we just talked about, which is a lot split, individual mortgage on each property, and then refinance.
And talking about a different kind of rate, what about nightly rates? Have they been pretty consistent the whole time? Have they gone up since you guys bought it?
Yeah.
Have you seen some upside there?
Yeah. So I'd say 2023 was great.
What is your average nightly rate?
I think it's around $297.
Okay. Obviously with the seasonal peaks.
Yeah. There's some valleys and there's some troughs and all that. But for us, it's been relatively consistent. August is our worst month, and then the spring and the
crazy
fall are
hot
great.
out there.
Yeah, very hot out there. But the spring and the fall have been phenomenal. So even in the wintertime, we do get some good activity. The wintertime has its own issues. So if it gets snowy out there, it's beautiful and the photos are incredible, but a lot of your guests are going to get stuck in the mud or the snow. So, it comes with its issues. But that also, that falls back to our management, and we can talk about property management as well.
You guys are not self-managing. You never have. You've always had a property manager, right?
Correct. Yeah. So when we first launched, we did a kind of hybrid model where we had a property manager who offered us a very discounted rate to basically be the boots on the ground. So they'd go there, they'd do the cleaning, and we were kind of responsible for a lot of the guest communications, for restocking the homes, ordering the product, sending it to them. A lot of things that I guess a traditional property management company would handle all inclusive for a fee, we would handle some of those, and in turn they gave us a reduced cost.
Were you worried about giving them full control, having never worked with them before, or is it more that you were looking to learn the business, having just gotten into it, that you wanted to kind of be more involved?
It was that we were working with the property management company prior to that, and he worked for the owner of that property management company and said he was going to go off and do his own thing. I'm going to give you a good deal to come with me. And we said, sure, why not? So we did that for a while, and then it became too much of a burden on us, and we wanted to have more of a triple net property, so to speak. And so what we did at that point is we hired a property management company who still, for a pretty good deal, you should always shop around and talk to a lot of different people out there, see how they're going to run your property and see how much it's going to cost. And we protected some cash flows. Kudos to my business partner on this one, and he found a really good deal, and they've done a phenomenal job so far.
That's great. And actually, that's a good segue. Cash flow is probably exactly what they want to see most in this video. So let's talk about what you bought it for, what you were able to pull out in the first refi, and then just typical cash flow monthly and annually.
Yeah, so all-in equity cost is around $450,000.
Is that per building, or is that total?
That's total altogether.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you bought the land for 65. You sold off the less desirable portion for 60, so you're in it for 5, and then the rest of the permit costs, the entitlement costs, the cost of construction, architecture fees, all that added up to 450.
Yeah, and there were a lot of mistakes along the way, and I can't emphasize this enough, especially for your first project. You're going to make mistakes. It's just you're cutting your teeth. It's just you're paying dues. All of this is part of the business,
right?
And so you need to have a buffer. And you need to have a very large buffer. For us, I can talk about all the mistakes we made, but some things that affected us is that Joshua trees were listed as a critically endangered species, or on the list to be considered a candidate as a critically endangered species. That happened after we bought the property. So our property is riddled.
I thought it already was.
We bought the property. A huge fire happens in Mojave Desert, and then Joshua trees were added as a candidate to be, possibly
while you're going through the permitting
process. And so we bought a property covered in Joshua trees, and then they become an endangered species candidate. Man. So what happened is that San Bernardino County started enforcing a law where if you disturb the soil within 10 feet of a Joshua tree, your project is immediately shut down. And if it was within 50 feet of a Joshua tree, an arborist had to come out, certify that the tree would not be impacted, and then they would give you a report and a letter saying, yes, your construction can continue as planned. These trees will survive. So that was a nightmare, candidly. And we had to do a lot of creative design and engineering to avoid these Joshua trees.
So that may have just pushed the cost up probably 5-10% more than they would have been.
For sure.
So it might be hard to quantify, but
I'll give you another one too, quickly.
Yeah.
When you're looking for utilities, another thing that was an issue is we're right next to BLM land. That's Bureau of Land Management. And what is a benefit of that is that it's not going to be developed on, right? So we've got protected views over thousands of acres.
It'll be preserved forever,
right? Into continuity or perpetuity. So that is a huge benefit, but the issue with it is that our power was on BLM land. There's a power pole right there. So we thought naively that you could just tap into that power pole, right? There's power right next to the property. It's on the adjacent lot. There shouldn't be any issues. And we called SoCal Edison, who was the utility provider of that power. And one of the junior employees there said, yeah, absolutely, you can tap into that. Never trust a utility company. Never trust them. You need to talk with a consultant or someone who really knows anything about utility connections, because you can get into a lot of expensive trouble with utilities.
Yeah, I mean, one of those poles is like 40 grand, right?
It was about $10,000 to replace.
For every...
Yeah, but here's the issue, and this is specific to California. It's not like this in every state, but California is very, very protective. And actually, this might not even apply to California because it's federal land. But what ended up happening is that this power pole, because it's on BLM land, you have to provide an environmental report. And that environmental report required at least a minimum year study of this power pole to make sure that no protected birds were nesting in the power pole before we replaced it.
Oh, wow.
And so, because of how power lines run, this power pole had to be replaced with new tensions, new soil disturbances, all these things in order to facilitate power to our property. We couldn't do that without doing at least a 12-month report on no endangered species nesting.
So did you guys go solar, or did you just...
So this was this was the ironic part of all of this. We sold off that southern piece of land, and we were, overjoyed with the transaction and how we kind of just flipped some raw land. Yeah. And then about a month later, we come hat in hand to our new neighbors and say, hey, by the way, I hope you guys like the land that we just sold you. We need an easement through your property to connect to power because we can't connect to the power next to us. So we spent the next, couple months negotiating a power easement through their property. They said that it had to be undergrounded because they didn't want their views to be obstructed by overhead lines. That adds a lot of cost. It also created another issue of soil disturbances by Joshua trees. So there's only a specific route, thank gosh, that we could go that would avoid Joshua trees having gone, west, east, whatever. So we go this one route, brought up to our property, and then we finally were able to connect, but we had to give them some money for this easement. It was $1,000. And then the cost of, trenching utilities was extremely expensive. So we burned a lot of money that we thankfully had made from the lot flip, but we burned it on, other things such as, false starts here and there, added cost. Yeah.
Beginner mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's been doing really well, right? So what are you cash flowing monthly on average? And again, there's peaks and valleys, there's high seasons and low seasons out there. But what would you say if you average it out over the 12 months, let's get monthly average cash flow and then your annual gross revenue?
So we're netting about 13% of our equity invested. So each year, 13% of that 450,000 comes back to us.
Got it. And that's before tax.
Correct. That's before tax. But there are some other benefits. We built in a opportunity zone, and had we known about that process beforehand, or actively worked to legally incorporate in the opportunity zone, we could have gotten some extra benefits there. But sadly, we did not. We did get the bonus depreciation, though. That was allowed.
That's great. Yeah. We've kind of talked about future plans for the property. Are you also looking at other Airbnbs to acquire right now? Or are you kind of waiting to see how the dust settles with, the economy and tariffs and everything else going on?
Yeah, I'd say right now it's a risky time to be buying. Sometimes that favors the bold. So who knows? I don't have a glass ball or a crystal ball, but I think that if you are buying right now, I would be cautious of anything that requires improvements, because with tariffs coming and supply chains being disrupted, there's a variable cost that you can't quite predict. So if you are going to
completely blow your pro forma.
Absolutely.
Completely.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point, because we've seen the whiplash of policy on tariffs, and we don't really know how that's going to affect the construction industry that much. I have a really cool interview coming up with a contractor who we use on a lot of stuff. And kind of his take on all that, so keep an eye out for that. But it is definitely a concern, and that's why we're trying to wrap up a lot of our projects right now, truthfully, just to see kind of what happens. But I think it's so much of a concern that it could actually prohibit buying some stuff right now because it's just too much risk.
Yeah, and I think that if you're getting a good deal on a new construction or already improved property, that might be something that you want to take on. But I think anything that's going to be ground up or require a lot of remodeling or improvements it's risky for sure.
That makes sense. Most has been great. Any last minute tips or advice for people looking to get into the Airbnb space? Obviously right now it's a little iffy just with everything going on, but I mean, if somebody was looking to buy their first Airbnb or learn about how to get into Airbnbs, any resources or just initial tips you'd give them before we close out?
Yeah, absolutely. So market research is critical, right? You want to know which market you're going into better than people who operate in it. And to do that, you need to talk with everyone who operates in that market. So going into Joshua Tree, I was studying that market for years before we actually bought something.
I remember. There. Yeah, you drive out there all the time.
All the time, talking with brokers, talking with property managers. And so if you're interested in doing a vacation rental, you should call every single property management company out there and talk to them. Where do I want to be? What properties are performing the best? What amenities do guests like? You should start.
And they'll probably shoot it to you straight because they want you to hire them.
Absolutely.
So obviously your success basically provides success for them.
Exactly.
So they'll probably give you the truth. I mean, did you use other stuff like AirDNA or anything like that?
Yeah, AirDNA was a great resource for us. It's a good way to find a high-level overview of markets in an area that are performing well. But if you're local to an area and you just kind of hear word of mouth that someone's doing well in a certain neighborhood, or so-and-so did a property out here or invested there, then maybe you want to dig into that more, right? And I think for us, we kind of chose a 3-hour drive radius and said, okay, what are the opportunities available to us around there?
That way you can have eyes on the project.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we're close enough to get out there if need be. And, you know, there are places like Tehachapi, Santa Barbara, some very high value areas that were just cost prohibitive for us to build in. And also the higher the cost of the property that you purchase, the more you need a cash flow. And really, once you start to get above $200,000 a year in cash flow, it's very hard for a property to do that.
Well, yeah, because the nightly rates have to be extremely high. And it's got to be a full luxury property, though.
Right. Yeah. And the demand at that price point isn't always there. You know, it can be more volatile. But if you're doing something that's a lower price point, catered to couples or, you know, in demand groups, so to speak, you're probably going to do pretty well. So how can you build it economically? Where can you build it? And then what's your market research pointing towards? Is it pointing towards positive successes? Do you have professionals in that neighborhood who have told you it's going to do well? Here are some examples of it. If all those indicators are yes, and you've got the capital, you got more capital than you need, you know, give it a try. Maybe not right now, but at some point when things stabilize, it could be a good opportunity to go for.
Well, this has been super fascinating, just hearing it again. I know we've talked about it in the past, but really appreciate the time. If you guys want a full tour of his Airbnb where we go out and show you, let us know in the comments. Maybe it's something we can put together next time next time you're in town, get you out there and go walk it. But if you also want to stay at his Airbnb, if you happen to be in Southern California, I'm going to leave a link in the description below, so go check that out. It's a beautiful property. There's 2 different houses to check out. What are the names of them?
Sand and Sky House.
Yeah, love it. Perfect for the desert. So again, I'll leave the link in the description below. You can go check out photos and nightly rates and all that. But that's it for today's video. Thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you guys learned a lot. And let us know in the comments if there's any questions or other things you want answered. But we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.